Hi, my name is Hunter Hauser, and today we have Dr. Bullard, and he's been documenting the environment and justice for over 40 years, and he has 18 books that he's written on the topic. One of his most known is The Dumping in Dixie, which has been I guess it's been around for so long that it became one of the most important books in your field. How do you feel about that book and its impact that it's had in the field that you're in? You know, you're like considered the father of environmental justice.
Well, when I wrote the book in 1990, which is, as a matter of fact, this year is 30 years. I wrote it to get in the hands of communities that were fighting environmental issues, and people call it low-income communities. It was only 160 pages, and the publisher made it a textbook, and so it got in the college classrooms and campuses and was adopted. So it became much more widely known than I had anticipated, and it's important that I wrote it in a way that it's easy to read. It's not really technical. It's not smoke and mirrors. It's not magic. It's just straight to the point, and that's, to me, was what I was trying to do.
You're kind of the father of environmental justice, right? And so if you could put like a 2-sentence definition on what environmental justice is for people that don't know, how could you simply explain it, even though it's not like a simple topic at all?
Well, environmental justice embraces the principle that all communities are entitled to equal protection of environmental laws in housing, transportation, energy, civil rights, and human rights. Environmental justice basically says that it shouldn't matter how much money you have or where you live, that you should have the same level of protection as if you were rich and lived in a community that had everything. And so when we talk about breathing air and drinking water and eating food, this is something that most people do. And so it's a matter of making sure that the food we drink, the air we breathe, and the land that we live on, and the parks that our kids go play on, and the schools are not located next to these dangerous facilities. That's what environmental justice is. It's not something that is made up by some radical sociologist. It's basic.
Dr. Bullard, you grew up in Alabama, correct? And you probably remember segregation, like you have your own memories of that, like in that system being in place. Do you remember there being a particular moment where you thought of these denying people of color not just economic opportunities, not just the ability to be certain places in their city, but really actively poisoning them because of parts of town that they lived in and what was nearby?
I grew up in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s in Elba, Alabama, which is South Alabama, in a segregated town. In my neighborhood, as you come from downtown, with paved streets, street lighting, and sewer systems, it stopped right at the edge of our community. The swimming pool in the city was for whites, and in the 60s, when they integrated the swimming pool and public facilities, our city leaders filled the swimming pool with dirt and covered it over to keep blacks from going to that swimming pool. So I grew up in a segregated system. I didn't have a white professor until I went to graduate school at Iowa State University in 1976, and so looking at the inequality in terms of the physical environment and in terms of housing, in terms of residential amenities, it was very clear that it was different. But it was not until later that it just hit me that this was not natural. I participated in the civil rights movement, against in terms of housing, open housing, fair housing, in terms of voting, but the environment was not one of those areas. And it was not until 1968 that Dr. King went to Memphis. It's when the environment and garbage came on the radar.
The sanitation workers.
Striking for better jobs, better work conditions, and the like. And 10 years after Dr. King was killed, 1968, I had my own garbage issue in Houston. 2 years out of graduate school, my wife came to me and said, would you help me do a study for this lawsuit that she had filed to try to stop a landfill from being placed in this predominantly black neighborhood in Houston. Well, you know, my training was in sociology, and my area of specialization was demography, housing, segregation, not environment and waste, but I was able to transition the studies and the research and the methodologies for housing and residential to include environment, include waste facilities, etc. And I did the study with my 10 students in my research methods class at Texas Southern, 1979 study, and that was the first study that was considered an environmental justice study.
So was she just an enterprising young lawyer who had met people in this community who needed representation? Like, how did she get involved with these residents?
Well, the residents had gone to a whole bunch of lawyers, and nobody would take the case. This is Houston, Texas. And the case for the state of Texas was getting ready to grant a permit to a company for siting of a landfill, and none of the lawyers would take the case. Well, my wife, young lawyer, just 2 years out of law school, decided that why not take the case, and so she took the case, and she needed someone to assist her in that case, and you know, she had basically filed a temporary restraining order to try to stop the facility, and she needed some type of evidence, some type of report, some type of study, and I got drafted to do it. And so it was like, okay, do you know how much work this is? This is a lot of work. And so I did the study, and the case is Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation, 1979. And this was the first lawsuit in the United States to challenge environmental discrimination, environmental racism using civil rights law.
How long did it take you to do the study? I mean, did it get introduced into the court case?
Well, we had the preliminary study. It took 2 weeks. That's because we had 2 weeks to bring something in. Of course, it was a preliminary study, but as the case was not thrown out, it meant that we had time to finish a real study. Now, you have to understand, this is not a time period when we had Google. We didn't have laptops, iPads. We didn't have databases. We had basic maps to try to generate data and try to generate a report that's as to where all of the landfills, incinerators, and garbage dumps are located in Houston from the 30s up until 1978. We were able to do the study, but again, I had to develop the research protocol to analyze and to have the methodology to be sound. What we found is that 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills were in black neighborhoods. 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators were in black neighborhoods, and 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills were in black neighborhoods. From the 30s up to 1978, 82% of all the garbage dumped in Houston was dumped in black neighborhoods, even though blacks only made up 25% of the population. That was the aha moment. So we had generated that data, and to show that this is not random, this is not isolated. A city that doesn't have zoning, that didn't have zoning then, these were decisions that were systematically made by individuals in power. And it was not until 1972 that Houston had the first African American on the city council. These were decisions made by all white men.
1972.
1972, wow. When Justin Robinson became the first African American on the city council. So the Houston study became the protocol, the methodology for doing studies, even to this day, in terms of how you locate, how you track, even though it's become much more sophisticated now with GIS mapping and with other kinds of tools. What we did back in '79 was basically by hand, coloring maps with magic markers and map pens and laying out, you know, census data and trying to look at the demographics of the neighborhoods by calculating, using the census, who lived where. It was very laborious work, you know, in tracing old newspapers in the library, using microfiche, cranking out. You know, I told this story to the students, you know, this morning, and it's like ancient tools. It's
microfiche.
It's like a hammer and a chisel that you're trying to do work.
But where's the Control F? I just want to search for the keyword.
Yes.
Nope.
Yes. Yeah. But again, you know, that's research is hard. Today, you can do a whole lot on a cell phone, and and a laptop and an iPad in terms of gathering the data, because so many databases that you can crosswalk and show exactly who lives where.
What happened as you started to look outside of Houston and other cities in the South?
Well, that's a very good question. That's how Dumping in Dixie, the book that I wrote in 1990, I wanted to expand the study and see, is Houston so different? Because it's the fourth largest city, doesn't have zoning, and we found these data, we found these results, these findings. And so I got a grant, expanded the study to look at Dallas. And all the lead smelters in Dallas just happened to be located in black and brown neighborhoods. I expanded to Louisiana, looking at Cancer Alley, that 85-mile stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Looked at who lives along the river next to these big chemical plants, refineries. Found the same thing, mostly African Americans. In many cases, African Americans who had bought land from plantation when they were freed, and the chemical companies came in the 50s. I went to Alabama, my home state, birth state, and found the nation's largest hazardous waste facility located in Emel, Alabama, in the heart of the Alabama Black Belt. 95% African Americans in the city and 75% in the county. I even went all the way to West Virginia, and a lot of people don't know that there are black people in West Virginia, and this company found them and put this chemical plant in the middle of this black community in West Virginia. The only place that manufactured methyl isocyanate, MIC, the same chemical that killed all those people in Bhopal, the only place that was MIC was manufactured in Institute. And so when you put those case studies together and you show that it's not just Houston, that black communities across the South are being dumped on with chemicals, with garbage, with all kinds of pollution and threats. That's how Dumping in Dixie came about. And as I said, I wrote Dumping in Dixie to get in the hands of communities, and not a textbook, but just so happened, things happen sometimes for a reason.
You went to the White House whenever Clinton was there, right? And so, when was that moment that you realized that environmental justice was starting to gain national attention, that what the work you were doing was actually starting to gain national attention?
Well, the environmental justice movement grew out of grassroots struggles like the one in Houston, like the one in North Carolina. And in 1982, the national environmental justice movement really gained momentum after the fight and struggle in Warren County against that toxic waste landfill. And over the years, we started to come together. 1991 is when Reverend Benjamin Chavis at the Commission for Racial Justice, United Church of Christ, actually pulled together a team of folks to plan the first National People of Color Summit. That was 91. We had the summit in 91, and then we got the EPA and the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences to do a conference in Washington, D.C. in 94 in February. And then the second day of that conference, a few of us got a call from the White House saying, okay, you need to come over because we want you to witness something. That was the signing of the executive order. Well, Dr. Chavis and I served on Clinton Gore transition team, so we knew we had recommendations into the new administration, but we never dreamed that we'd be going to the White House and witnessing the signing of an executive order. And of course, the White House, it's a nice office, and we got pens and we took photo ops, but we got environmental justice on the radar, and Clinton basically moved the agenda from the Bush administration that created the Office of Environmental Equity. President Clinton changed the name, expanded it, funded the Office of Environmental Justice, the executive order, and started to work on issues that a lot of communities across the country had been wanting to get moved, to get emphasis. And so our movement, grew out of just small struggles to become a national movement. And today, environmental justice is global and has an environmental justice framework. The principles of environmental justice have been adopted by people who are working on climate. It's called climate justice. Yeah. Climate justice is the fastest growing movement across the globe. And lots of young people. And that to me gives me hope, gives me optimism.
How can young people like our age, I know you've had classes, you've taught tons of students, but what do you usually tell people our age what we can do about it?
Well, I tell young people that this is your issue, and that every one person can make a difference, and that every social movement that has been successful in this country has had a strong youth and student component, that space. And if you look around the world today, young people, you're making a difference. So your generation will take it across the finish line. I always say the fight for environmental justice and climate justice and justice, period, it's not a sprint. You won't wake up next day and say, oh, we won a race. It's a marathon. As a matter of fact, it's a race that doesn't exist. It's called a marathon relay. You run your 26 miles, and then you pass the baton off to the next generation to run 26. That's how I see it. And we're passing the baton to your generation to take it across the finish line.
Your website is drrobertbullard.com, and I know you have tons of books, 18 books that people can read. There's a lot of information. You've done a lot of speeches. I watched one of your speeches earlier today. Thank you for being here at Trinity. It's an honor, and we're happy to have you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.